Hello everyone. I hope you had the great holidays. Today I'm gonna really welcome you at our first webinar in 2022. And I hope you've enjoyed our previous events and you will enjoy this one as well. Yeah, before we start, I'm gonna just remind you about the rules of the webinar that we have, and I'll tell you a few words about Chemspace. So I hope you can hear me and see my screen. If so, please type anything in either in chat or questions box. Okay. Yeah. Great. So a few words about the rules. You will be muted during a whole webinar, and you can type your questions in the question box. And once we finish with the presentation, I'm going to read the questions, and Guy will answer them. The webinar will be recorded, and you will receive the recording of the webinar after the event is finished soon. Also, if you have any questions or interested in a Chemspace platform, please follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, or Facebook. So yeah, so before we actually begin our presentation, I'm gonna just remind you what we're doing and who we are. So Chemspace is a marketplace for small molecules. With our resource, you'll be able to access a variety of chemistry provided by different suppliers of building blocks and screening compounds. And you don't need to go to each of the suppliers, but allow us to perform all work for procuring chemicals for you. Our catalog is probably the largest available for search and buy from. We host over 400,000 in-stock building blocks and reagents provided from over 30 preferred suppliers, over 6 million in-stock screening compounds, and the above include over 90,000 tool compounds or chemical probes. We also have listed billions of make-on-demand analogs to in-stock compounds. So these make-on-demand analogs are not in stock, but can be synthesized pretty fast in 2 to 6 weeks and delivered to you with really high success rate, over 75%. To enable access to that huge variety of chemistry, we have installed ultra-fast and efficient substructure and similarity search engine that allows you to access these billions in just seconds. You can also search molecules using text identifiers such as CAS, MFCD, Chemspace, or supplier IDs, etc. You can also search by a list of structures using plain text or SDFs. If at some point you can't find a molecule of interest, we'll be happy to source it for you. Our well-trained sourcing team will source almost any molecule available in the world, either from in-stock or from custom synthesis providers. Along with the small molecules, we have supported our customers with requests such as a large-scale synthesis, including GMP production, peptides, proteins, antibody, drug conjugates, macrocycles, etc. We also support access to Dell technology. And with that, I'm just gonna focus a little bit on Dell. So through Chemspace, you can get access to hidden open Dell library, which contains over 1 billion molecules. You can get all the information on the library that can be used further for modeling or SAR. We have just partnered with a company called Cambridge Molecular to enable application of AI and machine learning on Dell hits that can be further applied to small molecules that we provide, like 6 million in-stock screening compounds or 20 billion in-amine real space compounds. And this partnership has been announced last December. So with that, let me introduce to you Guy Lewy, a co-founder and chief scientific officer of Cambridge Molecular. Just a few words about Guy. He has a huge expertise in the field. He's graduated from University of Cambridge. He's been a director of science at Synthetic Gestalt. And since 2019, he serves as a CEO of Cambridge Molecular. So today, Guy will tell us about the company and their approach to process the Dell results. So Guy, I'm going to pass word to you.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. I can hear you well.
Great.
So now you...
And can you see how are we doing with the screen share?
Yes, I'm going to make your presenter now.
Okay, I think. How's that doing?
Yeah, we can see your screen. We can see your mouse.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much. Thank you very much for introducing me and for hosting me today. It's a real pleasure to be here, and a real pleasure to receive your continued support with such a fantastically large and high quality catalog set. So thank you for both. I'm Guy Lewy of Cambridge Molecular, which to introduce very briefly before I talk about how to calm the storm that is Dell. I'll give a few words about Cambridge Molecular. We are a machine learning and data science company entirely devoted to Dell applications. We're based in Cambridge, England. We are 3 years old and we serve industry-leading clients of all sizes, entirely Dell-related challenges. With the official Dell machine learning partner of HitGen, we have currently 10 undisclosed partnerships, and we have official catalog partners in Chemspace, Unamine, and MQL, who we're very pleased to mutually support each other. So today, before I go to the main meat of the matter, a short thought about Dell. Of course, we all know with HDS, the sort of previous generation of very high throughput screening resources, 1 million data points used to feel like a great wealth of information. Of course, with Dell, 10 billion data points is now actually quite easy. That's a rather small Dell in the global scale. Our data sets are 10,000 times larger than they used to be. Why are our insights not commensurately more valuable? This was a question we've been thinking about for years. And there is one major answer, which is noise. Dell is very noisy, and the noise creates obvious waste in two sort of immediately clear forms. The first is low off-DNA resynthesis success rates, which is very clear to every Dell team. How much do we spend as a community resynthesizing compounds that turn out to be noise? Conversely, how much do we spend trying to find the structure of a side product that binds but shouldn't really have been there in the first place and wasn't part of a reaction scheme? Secondly, the opportunity cost of Dell noise is very significant. We always only have limited shots per target, whether we're ordering from a catalog or doing resynthesis. We're always limited. What more could we learn if more shots landed on target and they were more diverse, if we could increase the success rate and learn more? So I suppose the main thought is noise in and of itself is worth investigating so that if possible, we can remove it and increase the value locked up inside a Dell dataset. And I'm going to briefly lay out two current paradigms for doing so. The paradigms we've identified are sort of two separate threads of what's going on right now. Two paradigms for addressing Dell noise. The first we call the Amplify Up paradigm, which aims to increase signal-to-noise ratio inside Dell datasets. It's very much in the research phase at the moment, but this presentation is about to summarize a novel contribution that we're making to the Amplify Up paradigm, which I'm very excited to share. There's also the Expand Out paradigm, which is somewhat more established. And the idea behind the Expand Out strategy is to move from expensive resynthesis space to faster and less expensive on-demand, lead-like, crucially catalog space. And as I said, this is somewhat established as a modality for denoising Dell and is gaining traction. And I'll talk a little bit about it at the end. Both paradigms aim, in a global sense, to expand the chemical space available to a Dell follow-up team to provide a fuller understanding of the pockets that are being bound, provide more lead-like hits more quickly, and to reduce costs. But in terms of specific focus, while the Amplify Up paradigm is sort of proximally devoted to increasing resynthesis success rates, the Expand Out families of paradigms are really mainly increasing the speed with which large amounts of chemical matter can be moved into the lab and tested. So I'll talk about both. But first of all, let's talk a little bit about Dell noise itself. Really, when you think about it and dig into any dataset, Dell noise separates into two dynamics, random and non-random. So when we're looking at random noise, we notice a few things. There are two main sources of random Dell noise. There is what we call screen jitter, surface effects, sort of aberrant little binding at the nanoscale effects, competition effects, that kind of thing, minute conditions that change between Dell replicates if you're running replicates, which mean that in essence fixed screening conditions do not yield fixed DNA tag concentrations, even if you run everything exactly the same. And in addition, making matters even worse, we have NGS noise, sequencing noise as well, which, as we know, means that a fixed DNA tag concentration does not yield fixed read counts if you rerun the same selection sample on an NGS. So the thing about random noise is that any individual data point doesn't mean much by itself. The error bars, as it were, are very high. But in aggregate, as you know, every random process fits within learnable statistical parameters and therefore tractable distributions. So there are many ways of dealing with random noise to extract meaningful insights from it. Non-random noise, on the other hand, can't be handled like that. And the main culprit for non-random noise in Dell data is unencoded reaction chemistry. Quite simply, what you see is not always what you get, as it were. The structures are not always as encoded because building blocks aren't always 100% what they should be, and sometimes can do different things over time. And more importantly, I suppose, reaction chemistry doesn't always proceed as scheduled. So quite often what you have in test tube is not what you should predict to have based on the reaction schemes. Of course, there's too much going on. There's too much complexity for it all to be perfect. And the key characteristic of non-random noise is that it's unlearnable. So unencoded reaction chemistry must be denoised in a way that uses chemical understanding and, of course, DNA-encoded library dynamics understanding. So there's a lot of noise. It's of different types. But let's talk briefly about what would be possible if Dell reads were noiseless. That is, what would be possible if Dell reads, read count, were affected only by the inherent affinity between the compound and the binding pocket. And to explore this thought experiment, here we've got an idealized binding pocket with a heavily schematized, idealized binder and some features that match up. So if, hypothetically, we lived in a world with no del noise, just read counts that tally with the affinity between the compound and the pocket, we would find some very nice things going on. We would notice that as soon as we have, if we have nothing, of course, the read counts are 0. If we have a small hit, which just about gets a foothold into a pocket, we'd start to see a small number of reads. If we grow this compound out in a way where it matches part of the pocket, maybe we see the reads go up again. If we match a feature, it'll go up yet again. And then maybe we get overexcited and we've gone too far. And now the compound doesn't fit anymore and we go back down to 0. So we reverse, we go back to the reasonable compound here. And perhaps we grow again in the other direction. And now the reads go up again because we're increasing more surface binding areas between the compound and the pocket. And maybe we match up the final feature here and the reads go up to 200. That would be really nice. The other thing that would be possible and quite exciting would be we can identify this as a local maximum of, I suppose, binding, well, a local minimum for binding, where there's maximum binding interactions and maximum space taken up within the pocket by the scaffold here. So if we were to identify other scaffolds, which were the local maximum of their own little universes of feeling their way along the pocket, maybe we could move along the scaffolds like this and see that as long as the pocket is fully taken up and the general nature of the interactions and features are the same, we'd expect the reads to be very similar for all these local maxima. That would be great, because the other thing we could do would be remove the pocket. Well, of course, we don't know the pocket. We just have del data. We just have the binders. We could add the other scaffolds that form the local maxima of their own journeys feeling along the pocket, 1 and 2, and maybe more. And of course, they would all fill up the major extent of the pocket and match the features. So we would end up with a map, a pocket map. And that pocket map could do all sorts of things. It can tell us about the protein pocket itself and all sorts of other possibilities. We can do resynthesis prioritization because we know which compounds are most likely to fit very well. We could do machine learning-based virtual screens into catalog space, or shape-based virtual screenings into catalog space. We would accelerate lead optimization because we could feel our way along essentially SAR on the way to these maxima. We could do selectivity optimization. We would have an unprecedented choice of chemical starting points for future work. We could investigate allosteric pocket binding or multiple binding modes. And we could cross-reference with any other structure-based or otherwise methods for analyzing the same system. It would be very exciting. Lots would be possible. And I hope you'll forgive the slight rhetorical flourish, but we have accomplished this at Cambridge Molecular. Del reads can now be denoised in a robust, very granular fashion. So this is the first public disclosure of a capability that is, as far as we know, entirely novel. It's been tested on 10 targets so far, and high certainty pocket maps with really nice detail successfully came out of every single target run so far. So to introduce it, it's called PocketMapper because it maps the pocket. It is at its heart a denoising system for del reads. It takes the normal selection of hits from a del screen and then denoises the read count and triages them so that any compounds which don't make the cut are removed and forgotten about, leaving just the compounds where the denoised del reads are high enough to merit further attention. They then undergo a process specific to PocketMapper called island divergence that I'll talk about further in a little bit, which groups the compounds into their natural groupings where each one appears essentially because it denoised for a particular reason. So there are similarities between different members of the group. I'll explain further a bit later. And crucially, each member still has the denoised read count attached. So when they're ranked by denoised signal strength, SAR results, and it's SAR that turns out to be consistent and very informative. And again, I'll talk about that in a little bit. Just as a sort of introduction, we've so far identified that PocketMapper provides at least 4 deep seams of novel information on the back of a particular Dell screen. And we're calling them shape consensus, island chains, intra-island SAR, island distribution, and then I'll talk a little bit after these introductions about lead optimization. So to talk about shape consensus, the islands that emerge, which are in essence disconnected regions of the Dell screen space that survive denoising and triage, each for different reasons. They're called islands because they rise above the noise. They're very clear, they're very obvious. Conceptually, when you zoom in on an island and look at which compounds are in it, each island, essentially, it looks like it contains representatives of a particular scaffold. Informationally, it's not related to a concept of a scaffold, but for now, it's a good sort of image to hold in mind, that each island is essentially sort of like one scaffold, and all of the SAR that denoised successfully that relates to that scaffold. So the crucial thing that we've found practically is that the highest ranked compounds on each island, despite being extremely structurally diverse, are exactly the same shape as each other, like the example. But while the schematic I showed was only up to 3, we generally see between 1 and 1,000 islands. So sometimes we can keep going for tens or hundreds of scaffolds, and they keep on overlaying perfectly and revealing matched features and very, very well matched shape. So here we can understand, of course, linkers coming in. Maybe this is the top compound in island 1, this is the top compound in island 2, and as you can see, they all overlay. So it's hard to point, but I hope that's clear enough. This is shape consensus. Another dynamic that we've noticed in the results is a concept we've decided to call island chains, which is that islands cluster into island chains. If we keep on thinking of each island as a particular scaffold and all inherent SAR, islands group very neatly into chains. Each island chain shares a global overlaying shape among the top ranked compounds. So far, we have seen 1 to 4 island chains in each screen. Very interestingly, each island chain turns out to deconvolute into a particular binding pocket or particular binding mode. So you could imagine one island chain here with 4 different structurally diverse scaffolds that overlay to show the main pocket. Over here, the same story for 6 unrelated scaffolds of totally different shape to the first scaffolds, but very similar shape to each other, which map out the main pocket, perhaps in a secondary binding mode in the main pocket. And you can just compare the two and see, understand sort of intuitively the shift of angles or whatever may have happened, which is always quite fun to see. And perhaps a third island chain, which maps the allosteric pocket. So as I say, we've only ever seen 1 to 4 major island chains pop out, and they do turn out to disambiguate pockets. I should stress you don't need to know in advance whether there is, say, an allosteric pocket. It will come out in the results if it's there, and it won't if it isn't. So this is the concept of island chains. A very brief word on intra-island SAR. Each island displays high resolution SAR because the denoised reads retain really good granularity. Meaning that compounds can be ranked up to 80 or 90 or 100 significantly distinguished levels within an island, which reveals SAR stories sometimes so detailed that they reveal stereochemical preferences of certain groups. And for a sort of sense of scale, the denoised SAR for the main pocket we've seen so far generally includes between about 30 and about 10,000 data points that can be matched up and consistently ranked in such in a high confidence way. And it's these ones that reveal. I mean, I've picked one very simple one here, the random scaffold, where you can move, just to imagine, moving a group around a ring, and you notice that the denoise read count goes up every time. More on this in a little bit. The final dynamic that is worth mentioning in summary is island distribution. We've noticed that island count and island size distribution vary greatly between screens, in that it's essentially a measure of signal strength in two different ways. Signal strength and island chain dynamics have been seen to vary consistently between Dell platforms and between targets. In particular, island count per 1,000 Dell hits and triage survivors per 1,000 Dell hits have emerged as a good proxy for denoisable chemically relevant diversity and denoisable screen quality against a particular target. So this is early days, this part, but it seems PocketMapper can probably be explored for novel methods in understanding and manipulating chemical diversity from a point of view of designing novel Dell systems. So just the final characteristic is lead optimization help, because PocketMapper provides very large amounts of helpful data for lead optimization. Just to give a few schematicized stories that have emerged from different Dell screens, it's very easy to tell. Let's imagine we're probing a hydrophobic pocket here and trying to understand what the limit of bulkiness we can fit into the pocket is. Maybe we see a Dell hit, which we add one extra carbon, we go a little bit bulkier and the reads increase, and then we go too far, we've pushed a whole ring into that sub-pocket and it goes down again. We can sort of find out the limit of how bulky you can go or not go. Let's imagine we've got a solubility problem during lead op, and we're looking to find ideas for what we can do to make the compound more soluble. Maybe we're trying to add another polar group, but the SAR from PocketMapper sometimes says if we've already got data on scaffolds like these, and when you denoise it, we find that the addition of a polar group here bears a significant penalty in terms of binding affinity. But if we add it here instead, it turns out not to incur such a significant binding penalty. Or perhaps we are looking, because Dell hits are quite large, to decide where to truncate to get a more lead-like compound, and we find that truncating here isn't so bad if we chop that bit off, but as soon as we chop this bit off and end up here, the denoised reads tell us that will incur a very significant penalty. So I should stress the main point of PocketMapper SAR is that there's a lot of low quality SAR that comes out of PocketMapper as well, but it's able to tell which bits are low quality and which bits can actually be trusted. So this is the bit I'm most excited about following up on in a sort of consistent long-term way. But just for a sense of perspective, screens so far have provided hundreds to 10,000s of high confidence SAR data points that should be certainly trustable. So that's a little bit about lead optimization. To be honest, there's likely to be more. We're learning more every screen, and we continue to learn about the capabilities of the system. Some experimental findings so far, having now used it on 10 targets, we find, I can't show structures, of course, I would love to, but instead I've got some stories. The top ranking PocketMapper compounds do predict the results of resynthesis work, but they often fill in gaps. So sometimes unworked, often larger or more flexible scaffolds that weren't attempted the first time round are shown by PocketMapper to be very likely to be the highest affinity compounds, or at least very good compounds with very novel chemistry going on. Importantly, they often reveal wholly unknown sub-pockets in the scaffolds that, for whatever reason, were never, the hits have never been grown into the right direction or at the right angle, but PocketMapper shows there is indeed another sub-pocket to be accessed. And on a similar vein, if moieties proximal to the linker are binding or not, often there's a linker area can create extra questions that PocketMapper turns out to be sometimes good at answering. The other main family of findings we've made is that if a target has a main pocket and an allosteric pocket, it shows two very cleanly distinguished island chains. Whether or not the team knew there was an allosteric pocket there at the beginning, but when we do know that there is a chain, it's so obvious that it's very, very clear. Both the main pocket and the allosteric pocket can be fully mapped in terms of shape, in terms of features, and the hits which bind each one. And large amounts of coherent pocket consistent SAR exist for all pockets. I suppose I should be clear that by coherent, I mean it agrees both internally, it makes stories that make sense, and it makes sense in the context of the pocket map. And as far as we have been able to cross-correlate so far with lab data, it correlates too. The next family of findings is that targets with multiple binding modes show clearly delineated island chains for each binding mode, and large amounts of coherence in the same way pocket-consistent SAR exists for all binding modes. Finally, when we have known hits against a target, they fit well into the target's pocket maps, and known non-hits against a target are much harder to fit well or impossible to fit into a pocket map. Features are extremely consistent between denoised scaffolds and often match up with the best known binders. So the last thing is that the pocket map sometimes provides very reasonable binding hypotheses that suddenly make a confusing binding affinity order very clear. Perhaps the top hits can be shown to interact with X sub-pockets, the next group of hits only interact with fewer sub-pockets, and it can really turn chaos into a sensible set of coherent binding hypotheses. So this is just a few experimental findings so far. There are many more. Just to go back to the beginning, PocketMapper tackles all of these challenges, and we think it's very exciting. So resynthesis prioritization is tackled. We can do machine learning-based virtual screening on just the denoised PocketMapper compounds to remove most of the random noise and the non-random noise as well. The shapes that come out of PocketMapper can be used for shape-based virtual screening. We could accelerate lead optimization. We can do selectivity optimization by close analysis of multiple binding pockets in different states. It provides an unprecedented choice of chemical starting points. We can map allosteric pocket structures as well as main pocket structures, and we can cross-reference with anything else. So in a sort of bird's eye view, we take the same noisy data that is normally processed by lengthy lab work to get some good but non-optimal hits. And instead, in 1 to 3 days, we can have a pocket map, all binder scaffolds that completely fill the pocket, information about all binding modes and all pockets that came out, and all denoised SAR from each pocket and binding mode. I can release a little bit about how it actually works. PocketMapper is a considered response to the informational and statistical dynamics of Dell noise. It is an entirely holistic approach. Each compound is understood in the context of all other compounds. It uses several, as far as we can tell, unpublished graph featurization procedures. It uses an, as far as we can tell, unpublished process for normalizing signal between Dell libraries. It uses an, as far as we can tell, unpublished method in graph classification. It is enabled by a new agreement with our main cloud partner, giving us access to very large computational resources. And I'm afraid for now, I'm under strict instructions not to share any technical information beyond the above. So this is a short introduction to the Amplify Up strategy, which I believe it shows a lot of promise. We found it's very, very promising. To briefly touch on the Expand Out strategy, which lets you move from expensive resynthesis space to faster and less expensive on-demand meat-like catalog space. The idea, and this has been seen by a few teams now, I know some companies, probably some watching now, do this as a matter of course every day. You take your binding data, train neural networks into binder, non-binder classifiers, and then use them to identify compounds within commercial or internal catalogs to test, potentially in multiple rounds. Our product for doing this is called Deep Delve, which has been in use for a little while now. And of course, the advantages of doing such a thing are novel, diverse, and drug-like leads arriving very quickly from catalog partners, enabling efficient exploration of chemical space. This is probably quite old to most viewers, but you can get many thousands of hits out. They're much less expensive than resynthesis. Deep Delve has a 79% max observed hit rate so far in its maximum confidence setting. Compounds are lead-like, novel chemical space is explored, and of course, you can bring more chemical matter into the lab from a huge variety, just a huge diversity of compounds that are more drug-like than Del hits, and you can test them without increasing your resynthesis burden. So the two strategies, and in fact the two Cambridge Molecular products, are highly synergistic and complementary, and can move things forward as well as denoising. So I hope this has been of some interest. That's all from me today. Thank you again for having me, Yuri, and I'm very much looking forward to any questions. Yuri, if you're saying something,
yes. Sorry, I was on. So yeah, we have few questions so far. The first question is the following: do you have evidence to suggest that PocketMapper works better for defined pockets?
Is the question in relation to intrinsically disordered proteins, or I'm not sure I fully understand what the questioner means by fully defined?
Yeah, I believe this is not if you apply PocketMapper not to the full protein but to defined pocket, to the defined pocket. Is it better or not, or it doesn't really matter?
I'm not clear on how it would be possible to do a Del screen on a pocket as opposed to a protein. If they mean, can you run it on Del screens where there's a block in one of the pockets, and yes, we've absolutely done that, and it does enable very clean mapping of both pockets. Was that the question about blocks?
Actually, Guy, you are right. That's structurally rigid proteins versus disordered ones.
Very good. We haven't yet been told that a target we've run it on is disordered. So I'm assuming that we haven't tried it yet, but there's no reason at all why it wouldn't work. We're really, it's been on my mind actually. Would be very interested to try that, because in principle it should be exactly the same as a more rigid protein, and you would still get a pocket map. But perhaps if there are several different structures that will stabilize in different ways the disordered protein, you might even find multiple pocket maps.
Okay, thank you. Another question. Would this method work for single point data of HTS, which is also noisy?
We're hoping to try it soon. We haven't tried it yet. We think it is quite likely to work, but we can't confirm yet.
Yeah, thank you. How do you determine the relevant conformation of the ligand when many compounds have a lot of similarly low energy conformations?
Very good question. This is why we call it a pocket map as opposed to a pocket structure. So naturally, very good question, in fact. If you just use the lowest conformation of compounds as calculated by any conformation generator, you do miss important structures and you don't get overlays. So we essentially start by compiling a kind of two-dimensional overlay. But when you do that enough, you find that some of the compounds that end up in the overlay, because often there are dozens or hundreds or even thousands that fully seem to fit the pocket, some of them are conformationally locked in a certain way. And every time you land on a few that are conformationally locked, you can go back and adjust everything else because you've just learned some more information. So you end up with an okay idea of the binding conformation in a good screen, but the fact that it isn't a perfect shape is why we call it a map and not a structure.
Thank you. Can individual hits be members of different islands due to different low energy conformations?
The islands are entirely separate. Actually, we don't find we haven't yet found compounds that sit in different islands. But of course that's just a sort of due to the underlying workings of PocketMapper. The island divergence process it forces things to diverge, so there wouldn't be any that end up in the same island. But thank you for the question. Good question.
So another one, have you compared experimental determined binding pocket crystal structures and docking results with the PocketMapper results?
Not yet, because we make a habit of not being told what the target is, so it hasn't quite it hasn't appeared yet. But maybe we're it's a question for the future, but we haven't done that yet.
Thank you. How do you deal with noise from screening artifacts and badly behaving molecules?
Yeah, it's a very important part of what PocketMapper is designed to do, but the underlying informational procedure that actually is run on the data, I can't go into today, but you can kind of imagine it as I can't think of a way of explaining without giving. I promise not to give any more technical information away today. But you find that they don't make it into the top rankings, and they don't make it into the alignment that needs to be done to create a pocket map. I'm sorry, I can't answer more clearly today.
Yeah, thank you. And by the way, are you planning to patent the PocketMapper, or it's already been patented, or published?
But we are not planning to publish PocketMapper.
Okay, thank you. How does PocketMapper do if only half of the hit binds with strong affinity and the other half is not important for the binding?
Then we will be able to see that in the truncation paradigm I showed briefly, that while the pocket is a certain shape, we'll notice that truncations to the arms that don't bind very strongly create less of a drop in denoise read count than if we truncate the other side. Also, we sometimes see when there's one part of the pocket that it's not contacting the binder so closely, it's more flexible, or maybe it's sort of larger, a bit of a cavern more than a pocket, we find the diversity of chemical matter that ends up in that part of the binding pocket actually expands and becomes a bit fuzzier. So we do get a bit of a feeling about the flexibility and the closeness of different parts of the pocket.
Yeah, thank you. Can you elaborate on how island chains are related? What determines if two islands are chained? Is it overlap in part of the structure or something else?
In practice, it's normally extremely obvious by eye. We look at the top compounds from each island. The islands, there's forced divergence between the islands, but we put them back together by eye because it's so clear, it's so obvious which one should go with which, that we look at the top ranked compound or the top couple of top ranked compounds in each island, and we find that they are the exact same shape in nearly all cases, despite being structurally extremely different. So any islands where the top ranked compound fits that shape, goes into that overlay, ends up in the same island chain. So they're not exactly spatially defined, these island chains. They're really island groups. Okay,
thank you. You mentioned processing the number of reads for the different compounds in a Dell screen. Is this implying that the screen only utilizes one single library that was simultaneously synthesized, or is it a conglomerate of multiple libraries? If it's the latter, have the read values between statistically corrected for the difference in population representation of the different libraries, another source of noise?
Very good question. It's the latter. We use all information from all DEL libraries. And on the, apologies if I slightly brushed through it, but one of the working parts we believe is novel is indeed a way of normalizing signal, PocketMapper signal between different libraries.
Yeah, thank you. Can this data pipeline identify cases of DNA binding?
Those will come out. They simply won't be in the PocketMapper results, because of course when there are 500 overlapping shapes, it's the chances that one of them, that the shape of the compound is sort of exactly the same, but also that the codons on the DNA are doing something, they're sort of somehow matching each time the changes that the shape does, is in a way that's where the structural binding nature of the DNA changes in step with the structural binding nature of the compound. It's so overwhelmingly unlikely that I think it's safe to assume that they're simply DNA tag only binders, just won't make it into the top ranked compounds.
Thank you. Other variations in denoised counts quantitatively account for loss of binding energy. In other words, KD directly correlates with denoised counts, or is it just a direction?
We don't know yet. We would love to compare directly with downstream lead optimization work and resynthesized compounds, but actually there isn't yet a rigorous proportionality that has been tested, but the direction is there for sure.
Thank you. So what do you mean by different DEL platforms leading to different results? Or maybe DEL libraries, DEL platforms?
Just that we find consistent differences. Even we've seen many platforms screened on many different targets. Of course, we don't know when they're screening the same target, but we have noticed that the broad swathe of the two metrics I mentioned are extremely different from DEL build to DEL build. And of course, it's possible that it's entirely down to different partners screening entirely different types of targets, and we normally don't know what the target families are even. So it's possible that it's just target choice differences, but it's also possible that, and it seems, my hunch is it's quite likely that different designs of DEL are vastly differently able to be at least in the way that we denoise. Some end up with extremely robust results, and some end up with much less robust results. That is consistent from DEL build to DEL build.
Yeah, thank you. Does PocketMapper start from the DNA sequences, or does it start from the counts determined by your partner's decode and count methods?
I've promised not to give any more technical information that isn't on this slide, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to say I can't share that.
Yeah, thank you. Does your approach require certain DNA screening setup? I mean, number of repeats per target, number of selection conditions per campaign, etc.?
No, it's extremely robust. We've tried it on multi-condition, we've tried it on single condition, we've tried it on repeats, we've tried it on physical repeats and non-physical repeats and NGS repeats. It's robust.
Okay, I think we have the last question here. So where do you see the limitations of the approach?
We don't know yet. We don't know. I'm very much looking forward to finding out how, as one of the previous questions asks, how good is the correlation between binding affinity and denoised read count, and in which situations is the correlation better, and in which situations is the correlation worse? That's one thing we'd really like to know. And another thing we'd really like to know is what is the ideal DEL library design that gives the best results through the lens of PocketMapper? That's something that we want to know as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we don't have any other questions left. So with that, I would like to thank you, Guy, for a really nice presentation. And I would like to thank you everyone who has joined us today. And stay tuned with us. Find out more about new events that we'll prepare for you through the social networks. Also, I would like to remind you that the recording of the webinar will be available on the YouTube, and you'll receive the link once we have it uploaded there. So with that, I would like to close the webinar. Thank you very much. Stay safe.
Thank you very much, Yuri, and thank you everybody for tuning in.
Bye.
Bye-bye.